Nia Brooks' story. They tapped the envelope twice. Not hard, not loud. Just deliberate. Enough to cut through the air like a warning shot in a silent room. I knew before they said a word. The timing, the tension, the way Bradley Whitmore, our newly arrived vice president from the New York headquarters, barely met my eyes as he gestured for me to sit. Nia, he began, his voice smooth, trained. I appreciate everything you've done for Verixon. That was when I knew for sure this wasn't appreciation. It was a performance. I've worked at Verixon Health Tech for 20 years. I started at 20, fresh out of a local mentorship program they launched in the early 2002 to diversify the pipeline. They handed me a badge. I earned the rest. Every late night, every audit survived, every compliance manual I wrote from scratch because the old ones were nothing but corporate filler. I did not climb quickly. I climbed precisely. I didn't get promoted because I talked the loudest. I moved forward because I noticed what others ignored. I fixed what no one else wanted to see. 3 days from now, I was scheduled to be honored in front of the entire board, media representatives, and regional directors. The Verixon Award for Ethical Excellence. I'd be the youngest recipient in company history and the first Black woman to receive it. It wasn't just a plaque. It was a declaration, a signal that the work mattered, that I mattered. And now, 3 days before that moment, I was being escorted into an office like a problem they needed to manage. I'm afraid due to ongoing budget recalibrations, we've made the difficult decision to restructure several departments, including compliance. He slid the envelope toward me like it was some neutral document. But I knew what it was before I touched it. A severance agreement. Signed today, walked out today, and most importantly, quiet today. I didn't reach for it. Not yet. I studied his face. Not out of anger but curiosity. Did he know what he was doing? Did he understand who I was? Because this wasn't a woman caught off guard. This wasn't a woman about to beg. This was a woman who had seen this coming and had been preparing for 4 long years. I took the envelope with a calm hand. Thank you for the opportunity, I said softly. Then I stood up, turned my back on a man who thought he was in control, and walked out without looking behind me. The hardest part wasn't being fired. It wasn't the loss of title, or the paycheck, or the stage I had earned. It was the realization that after 20 years of precision, of protecting a system too fragile to admit its own faults, they still thought I was disposable. But what they didn't know, what Bradley couldn't imagine, was that while he had been orchestrating board meetings and budget schemes, I had been documenting patterns, tracking changes, not for revenge, for clarity, for truth. Because when you've built the house, you know exactly where the cracks run, and I knew where every single one of theirs was hiding. I walked out that building, not as a victim, but as a witness, and I was finally ready to speak. The quiet build, Nia Brooks' story. They used to call me the girl with the quiet clipboard. At first, it was a joke. A harmless nickname tossed around when I was still just an intern, barely 20, barely visible. I didn't dress flashy. I didn't talk loud. I didn't try to prove anything. I just listened. In meetings, when executives talked over each other, I listened. When departments pointed fingers, I tracked the details. While others rushed to conclusions, I traced the threads back to origin points, silent anomalies, overlooked expenses, contradictory timestamps. That clipboard? It was never empty. It was my witness. And slowly, they stopped laughing. By the time I turned 28, I had moved up to compliance analyst. Not because I chased promotions, but because every time there was a fire, they called me to explain how it started. By 32, I was leading my own audits. By 36, I had rebuilt our compliance training from the ground up, shifting the language from fear-based warnings to purpose-driven integrity. I didn't want employees to obey because they were afraid. I wanted them to understand why ethics mattered, why small lies led to big fractures. I became head of risk and compliance at 37, the youngest department head in Verixon's history, and still some days, I was introduced in meetings as Nia from Quality Control. Still, they would glance at my skin, then at my title, then back at my skin. But I kept showing up. I kept documenting. And the numbers kept speaking for me. Under my lead, we went from a moderate risk rating by the National Institute for Ethics and Compliance to a low risk, high transparency designation, one of only 6 firms in our industry to hold it. It took years of rewiring how people thought, how they reported, how they responded to pressure from the top. I was that pressure now, but not with fear, with facts. I mentored younger analysts, especially Black women, who felt they had to walk softer just to stay in the room. I reminded them, your silence isn't protection, it's permission. And somewhere in the background, I started noticing changes. New project invoices approved without my review. Backdated certifications that didn't match production logs. Expense reports that repeated numbers copied, not calculated. When I asked questions, the answers came slower, more vague, less curious. That was 4 years ago. I didn't raise alarms. Not then. I documented. Because I knew from experience. Speaking up too soon makes you a target, but documenting long enough makes you undeniable. So I printed what I needed to. Saved what I could. Not at work. At home. On my time. Carefully. Legally. Quietly. It wasn't paranoia. It was insurance. Because I had seen what happened to people like me when they raised red flags too early. Their judgment was questioned. Their performance dissected. Their tone criticized more than their evidence. And eventually, they were erased. I would not be erased. Not this time. The company holiday parties came and went. The awards dinners. The town halls where leadership called me a pillar of integrity. They said all the right things in front of the microphone. But behind closed doors, they were cutting corners, so quietly you needed to listen with more than ears. You had to listen with your gut. And my gut was screaming. But I said nothing. Not yet. Because the truth wasn't ready. Not until the pattern was clear. Not until the house was shaking, and they could no longer pretend it was the wind. By the time Bradley Whitmore walked into Virexon's Atlanta office, fresh from New York with his tailored suits and carefully curated LinkedIn charm, I had already mapped out the cracks in our foundation. He didn't know that. He looked at me like I was an inconvenience, like a holdover from a system he was brought in to modernize. But what he didn't realize is, I was the system. I wasn't just watching it. I had written it, protected it, preserved it. And now, I was watching him. He thought he could dismantle it in 3 days. What he didn't see, what he couldn't imagine, was that I had spent 4 years preparing for his arrival. Because people like Bradley don't walk in to fix things. They walk in to erase people like me. But I had already made peace with something years ago. I was not disposable. I was the record. And when the day came, I would be heard. The first cut Nia Brooks story. The sun had already started dipping when I got the calendar invite. Subject: quick sync, end of week. From Bradley Whitmore. Time: 4:15 p.m. Location: Executive Suite 3B. No assistant, no context, no pleasantries. Just one of those vague little messages corporate people send when they do not want to leave a paper trail but still want it to feel routine. Except I knew. There's something about working in compliance that sharpens your senses. You can smell intent long before the words come. And everything about that invite on a Friday, at the end of day, just days before I was scheduled to be honored for 20 years of service, reeked of design. So I walked in prepared. Bradley stood near the window, looking out like he was trying to memorize the skyline. He didn't turn when I entered. Just said, "Have a seat, Nia," like we were old colleagues catching up over coffee. I sat. Calm. Straight-backed. Clipboard in my lap. Old habits die hard. He finally turned, slid into his chair, and clasped his hands like a man about to offer condolences at a funeral. "Nia, I want to first thank you for the extraordinary work you've done here at Virexon. Your reputation is admirable." I didn't blink. He continued. "As part of the realignment strategy recommended by our partners in New York, we've had to make some tough decisions. And unfortunately, your department is part of the restructuring." There it was. Clean. Sterile. Scripted. He said the word, unfortunately, like it tasted foreign, like it did not belong to him. He slid a manila envelope across the desk, tapping it twice. There's a severance package inside. 3 months' pay. We'll also offer a glowing reference, of course. Of course. What he did not say was this. If I signed the papers inside, I would forfeit the right to sue, to speak, to publish, to be heard. My name would vanish from the speaker list at the awards banquet. My 20 years would dissolve into a non-disclosure clause. And the version of me they crafted for the press, model employee, quiet exit, would be the only one left. I looked at the envelope, then back at him. This isn't about budgets, I said flatly. He hesitated. Just a flicker. I'm not sure what you mean. You posted record quarterly gains last week. And I know for a fact that the new compliance software contract was shelved to preserve cash flow right before your consulting firm received an internal approval for triple the amount. That one hit. I saw it in the way his posture stiffened. I smiled, but not kindly. This isn't realignment, I continued. It's erasure. He reached for that managerial calm, sat up straighter, fixed his tie. I'm not going to debate corporate strategy with you, Nia. Let's keep this professional. The word they always use when you hit too close to truth. Professional. Because truth is only acceptable if it's polite. If it makes room for their comfort. I stood, slowly, picked up the envelope, not because I intended to sign it, but because I wanted to see the look on his face when I said, "Thank you for the opportunity." His lips curled slightly, a smugness mistaken for control. And then I walked out. The corridor felt longer than usual, fluorescent lights overhead buzzing like a warning signal. Janine from HR was already waiting near my desk. Her eyes couldn't meet mine. She held out a cardboard box. "I'm here to help you collect your things," she whispered. I nodded. Not because I accepted it, but because I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me crack. My desk was neat. Always had been. A framed photo of my father, one of the first black engineers at Fulton Electric. A ceramic paperweight from my niece that read, "Still I Rise." And the draft speech I had written for the awards ceremony. Now pointless. I packed each item carefully. Not like I was leaving, but like I was preserving an artifact. Janine tried to speak. "This? It isn't right, Nia." I looked at her, eyes steady. "I know." That was all. I left the building through the side entrance. Not because I had to. Because I chose to. The sky had shifted by then. That strange purplish hue Atlanta gets when it's about to rain, but holding off. Like it knows something is coming. I drove in silence. No music. No podcasts. Just the hum of the engine and the thud of my own pulse. This wasn't heartbreak. This was clarity. They didn't just remove me from a role. They tried to erase me before I could be seen. 3 days. That's all they needed. 3 days to stop a name from being announced. A story from being celebrated. A voice from being amplified. They underestimated one thing. I never needed their microphone. I had already built my own. The hidden files. The first time it happened, I let it go. It was a simple invoice, wrong date, wrong department code, and a signature from a director I knew was on sabbatical at the time. I flagged it, like always, sent it up the chain with a short note. Unusual timing. Needs verification. The reply came back within minutes. Handled. No further action needed. That was 4 years ago. The second time, it was an internal certification, an inspection clearance document, signed a full week after the product had already shipped to hospitals across the Southeast. I raised the alarm again. Already approved at the executive level. Let's not overcomplicate. The third time, I stopped counting, because it was no longer a glitch. It was a system. A structure designed not to correct itself, but to bury correction. The deeper I looked, the more I realized. I wasn't supposed to be looking. I was supposed to nod, approve, smile, and keep it moving. But that's not who I am. And if they had ever really known me, not the polished woman in navy suits at compliance briefings, but the daughter of activists, the niece of a woman who once chained herself to the courthouse steps for voting rights, they would have known this. I was always going to remember. So I started documenting. Not because I had a plan, but because something deep inside whispered, "You might need this someday." And when you grow up black, in a system that was not built for you, you learn that insurance does not just mean health or dental, it means receipts, it means copies, it means records in your own handwriting and duplicates in places no one can touch. I bought a steel lockbox. Not flashy, not high-tech, just solid, hidden behind coats in a back closet, beneath winter scarves and boxes of holiday lights. Inside, I kept everything: memos, emails forwarded to my private account, meeting notes scrawled on yellow legal pads with times, names, contradictions, scanned documents with metadata intact because deleting things from the server does not erase what I've already seen. Every time they told me, "It's above your pay grade," I listened and wrote it down. Every time someone whispered, "Just let it go," I nodded and saved a copy. I didn't share the files with anyone. Not my family, not my friends, not even my closest colleague in compliance. Not because I was paranoid, but because truth is delicate. Handled wrong, it cracks. So, I protected it the only way I knew how, by making it mine. Carefully, quietly, methodically. The pattern became undeniable. Each quarter, financial reports came with minor adjustments that curiously always pushed profits upward just in time for investor briefings. Product documentation was often signed retroactively. Expense reports included vendor payments to companies with no website, no tax ID, and often no record of services rendered. Once, I confronted a finance officer directly. His response? "Don't you want to be a team player, Nia?" I remember looking him in the eye and saying, "Compliance is not a suggestion, it's the foundation." After that, the temperature changed. I was left out of meetings. My edits to documents were overwritten. Some memos bypassed me entirely. And yet, when they needed a name on the compliance briefings, when the board asked for transparency metrics, they still came to me. Because I was their mask. I gave them legitimacy. And slowly, I realized they didn't fear lawsuits. They feared exposure. They didn't want to be held accountable. They just wanted to look like they were. So I stopped trying to fix it. And I started preparing for the moment I'd need to reveal it. It was not revenge. It was survival. And more than that, it was duty. Because if I stayed quiet, I would become an accomplice. And if I spoke too soon, I would be discarded as a disgruntled employee. I waited, watched, built the record. And when Bradley Whitmore walked in, slick hair, sharp tie, smile that never touched his eyes, I knew he wasn't here to lead. He was here to finish the cover-up. That's when I moved the files out of the house. Made 3 evidence packets. Identical. Indexed. Labeled. One stayed with me. One went into a private safe at my lawyer's office. And one, well, let's just say, insurance means options. I was no longer just protecting myself. I was protecting the truth. And when the day came, when the manila envelope hit the desk, and my name was erased from the celebration lineup, I didn't flinch, because I was never chasing their applause. I was holding the receipts. The call. The house was silent. Not the kind of silence that soothes. The kind that hovers. Thick. Watchful. I had barely touched my dinner. The envelope from earlier sat unopened on the kitchen table, as if daring me to acknowledge it. I made a cup of tea. I didn't really want hands moving on instinct, not desire, and sat at the same table where I once taught my niece long division, where I once reviewed audit reports deep into the night, where I used to laugh. Now it was just me. And the storm that was coming. It was 3:17 a.m. when I reached for my phone. Not because I was sure, but because I was done being unsure. I scrolled past the usual names, past work contacts, past old friends, until I stopped on one. Dr. Marcus Ebo, National Institute for Ethics and Compliance. We had only met once 4 years ago, at a regional symposium on corporate transparency. He had spoken about whistleblower protections, legal recourse, and the need for truth anchors inside every company. When I asked a question during the Q&A, he looked me directly in the eyes as he answered. He didn't patronize. He didn't deflect. He listened. And so, I saved his number. Not for gossip. For emergencies. Tonight was that emergency. I hit call. He picked up on the second ring. Nia Brooks, he said, his voice low but alert. I wondered when you'd call. I exhaled. Is now a bad time? For truth? Never. There was a pause. Not awkward, just respectful. Then he asked, Are you ready? I think I need to blow the whistle. Another pause. Then, I'm listening. I told him everything. For the next hour and 40 minutes, I walked him through it all chronologically, carefully, like I'd practiced in my head 1,000 times but never dared to say out loud. I laid out the emails, the backdated certifications, the internal memos that contradicted public reports. I told him about the severance, the timing, the silence they tried to buy. He never interrupted. Just asked the right questions. Took notes. When I finished, he didn't offer sympathy. He offered clarity. This isn't just retaliation, Nia, he said. This is securities fraud. This is systemic manipulation. And you're not just a witness, you're the key. I sat back in my chair. For the first time in hours, my chest loosened slightly. Not relief. Not yet. But direction. He outlined the next steps. A secure, off-site meeting, first thing Monday morning. Legal counsel present. Protected channels for evidence submission, under federal whistleblower protocols. Until then, he said, say nothing to anyone at Virexon. Not HR, not legal, especially not Bradley. I wasn't planning on it, I replied. He chuckled lightly. I didn't think so. Oh! We hung up at 5:04 a.m. Dawn was just beginning to touch the horizon. I stood, walked to my closet, and pulled out the evidence packet. Held it in both hands. It felt heavier than I remembered. Not physically. Spiritually. Like the weight of every overlooked truth had finally gathered in one place. This wasn't a war. It was a reckoning. And I had just made the first move. The storm breaks. By sunrise on Monday, I was dressed in the navy blue suit I once wore for courtroom depositions. Pressed. Precise. Symbolic. It wasn't just about looking professional. It was about reminding myself, this is who you are. Not a victim. A validator. A truth bearer. Traffic into downtown Atlanta moved like it sensed something was about to break. Maybe it was just me. Maybe I was the storm. The federal building was quiet when I arrived. Doctor. Marcus Ebo greeted me in the lobby with a nod not formal, not casual, just steady. He led me into a glass-walled conference room. Waiting inside were two others. Renee Calloway, Senior Legal Counsel with the Whistleblower Protection Division. Dr. Jalen Mays, Forensic Analyst with eyes that flickered across every document like he could smell fraud on contact. Renee opened with a warning. Once we begin this process, Nia, there's no turning back. Are you ready? I nodded. I'm already in motion. And so we began. Nearly 3 hours of methodical walkthrough. Spreadsheets. Email threads. Backdated quality controls. Inconsistencies between public statements and internal reporting. Dr. Mays whistled at one of the reports. This isn't a mistake. This is structure. Intentional structure. I felt it again, that ache. Not of fear, but of betrayal. This was my company, my team, my life's work. And they poisoned it from the top down. Renee asked gently, Do you believe your termination was retaliation for raising these concerns? Without a doubt, I answered. It wasn't just poorly timed, it was surgical. They took my official statement, sealed and logged the evidence. And before I left, they handed me something unexpected. Protection. Legal. Federal. Immediata. They knew the call was coming. And it did. By 12 p.m., my phone lit up. Janine from HR. Then, Marcus from legal. Then Bradley. All urging me, some politely, some not to, review the severance agreement before close of business. I didn't answer a single call. At 4:45 p.m., there was a knock at my door. Through the peephole, Bradley Whitmore. Suis pristine. Eyes frantic. Nia, let's be reasonable, he called out. I didn't open the door. I didn't speak. He slid a second envelope into my mailbox. Final offer. Signed by 9 a.m. Tuesday. I made another cup of tea. Because tomorrow Tomorrow would be louder than anything he could imagine. By Tuesday morning, the ripple had become a wave. Words spread fast. Very fast. I didn't need to check headlines. My phone lit up with messages from old coworkers, ex-clients, even people I hadn't heard from in years. The SEC had confirmed receipt of the whistleblower complaint. Virexon Health Tech stock had dropped 18% by noon. I got a text from Janine. The board just called an emergency meeting. Bradley's locked in his office. Everyone's panicking. I didn't respond. At 1:37 p.m., a new number called. William Keene, chair of the board of directors. A man I had seen less than 5 times in 2 decades. He never once used my name in a hallway. Nia, he said, voice strained. We're in a situation that requires your input. Can we meet tomorrow? I took a slow breath. I'm afraid that won't be possible, I said coolly. Any future conversations will involve my legal team, and possibly federal representation. I'm sure you understand. The pause on the other end told me everything. Too late. You had your chance. And you wasted it. That evening, I sat by the window as the sky darkened. Atlanta lights blinking like nervous heartbeats across the skyline. This wasn't about vindication. Not yet. This was about accountability. The storm had broken. And now, they were the ones running for shelter. The boardroom showdown. Friday morning. Same building. Same boardroom. But this time, I was not alone. My attorney, Maya Sorrell, walked beside me graceful, unshaken, carrying a black leather folder that could cut cleaner than any blade. We entered the room together. At the far end sat William Keene, chair of the board. Next to him, 3 other directors, all looking like they had aged 10 years and 5 days. Outside counsel in navy suits. But one chair was noticeably empty. Bradley Whitmore. Absent. Interesting. William cleared his throat. Thank you for meeting with us, Miss Brooks. We understand there's been a significant misunderstanding. I said nothing. He continued. We would like to offer full reinstatement, retroactive pension vesting, and a permanent consulting position, effective immediately. They wanted to clean the blood with corporate perfume, dress their desperation as dignity. Maya leaned forward. Let's be clear, Mr. Keene. Miss. Brooks didn't report these findings after termination. She reported them internally repeatedly for 4 years. And you ignored her. Silence. The kind that hurts to sit in. William finally said, That's part of what we're reviewing. I spoke then. Quietly. Sharply. I'm not here for a title, or for optics. I'm here because you made me invisible for 2 decades. And now, you suddenly need me to clean up the mess you helped bury. They shifted in their seats. Uncomfortable, as they should be. I continued. You can offer me reinstatement. You can backdate every dollar. But let me be clear. I will not be silenced. I will not be used. And I will not pretend this company did right by me when it did not. Maya closed her folder gently. We'll wait to hear from federal investigators. Any cooperation moving forward will happen on our terms. And with that, we stood. No handshakes. No apologies. Just truth, left on the table like something they never learned how to hold. As we walked out, Maya whispered, That was perfect. But I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. Just clear. Clear on what needed to happen next. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every single voice they silenced. Every woman who was overlooked. Every truth they buried to protect their power. Now the world was finally watching. Nia Brooks's story. By the following Monday, Virexon Health Tech was unrecognizable. The headlines were no longer local. They were national. Front-page banners that read, Federal probe launched into Virexon's financial practices. Whistleblower alleges years of systemic fraud. Retaliatory termination sparks SEC investigation. And then the name dropped. Nia Brooks. I wasn't ready to be known. But suddenly, there it was. My name printed and reposted, shared across platforms, synonymous with accountability, with courage, with consequence. The calls came quickly. Reporters, podcasters, ethics panels, universities offering speaking engagements. I turned them all down. This was never about building a brand. This was about truth. That morning, Marcus called with an update. His voice was tight, serious. Nia, it's worse than we thought. I exhaled slowly. How bad? 5 years of falsified earnings, multiple board members complicit, there's email evidence. This didn't start with Bradley. He just accelerated it. I went still. That meant this rot went to the core. Later that afternoon, Bradley emerged from hiding. He gave a carefully staged interview with a major news outlet. He blamed me, said I was bitter, said I'd misunderstood the data, said I had been struggling with transition. I watched it with the sound off. He looked small, smaller than I'd ever seen him. But I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because the next day, I unlocked a final box. A sealed envelope from 3 years ago emails I hadn't fully understood back then, but something told me to save. They were between the former CEO and 2 board members, outlining how to artificially reclassify revenue streams to avoid detection before a merger. One line still chills me. If the numbers don't add up, we change the formula. Nia's team doesn't need to see this. That was all I needed. I scanned and sent it to Marcus. His reply came within 5 minutes. This changes everything. By evening, Virexon's stock had plummeted another 12%. Total loss, nearly 30% in 1 week. The next morning, the board called another emergency meeting. Bradley was fired for cause. 3 directors resigned. Charges followed. Public, criminal, unavoidable. 6 months later, I sat in a federal courtroom as they stood before a judge, no longer executives, just defendants. And when Bradley turned and saw me seated in the gallery, he didn't smirk. He didn't plead. He just lowered his eyes. He didn't recognize me. He recognized what I represented. Consequences. I declined Virexon's offer to return as a consultant. There was nothing left for me there. Instead, I accepted a position with the National Institute for Ethics and Compliance, working to build stronger protections for future whistleblowers. The SEC awarded me a percentage of the fines recovered. I used part of it to create a scholarship fund for Black women entering careers in compliance and law. Named it after my mother. She used to say, "Your truth is your birthright. Guard it like gold." Now I do. My niece moved back to Atlanta with her daughters. We bought a little house near the lake. Quiet. Warm. Where birthdays matter again. Where Sunday dinners are never missed. One evening, she asked me, "Do you regret it, Auntie? Staying at Virexon all those years?" I thought for a long time. "No," I said. "I regret what they did, but not who I was there. Because I held the line. And in the end, that's what mattered most." If you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or erased, this story is for you. Not just to inspire, but to remind you, your silence is not their safety net. Your truth has weight. And quiet strength is the kind that changes everything.